No, he's in Colorado this year too.
My son was out in Utah.
Well, yes,
Well, he's got a whole bunch of friends at the University of Utah that do snowboard. And so he was out in Park City, Canyon.
keep track of all of them?
Sorry. No, here. It's the same.
Part of the process.
I get it. What do you mean if you don't?
Brad, how about you?
Good evening.
Dennis, where do you want them to sit, buddy? She sits right.
Yeah, we're the senior class. I'm in fighting mode.
Yeah.
We're still waiting.
Had the donations.
Right. Get right up.
Yeah. We'll call the meeting to order. I would ask that everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first order of business on the agenda this evening is the Citizen Scholarship Foundation proclamation. This is the kickoff of their annual phone-a-thon fundraiser. I'll read the proclamation into the record. Whereas the Citizen Scholarship Foundation is a group of hardworking, dedicated individuals, and whereas the Citizen Scholarship Foundation members have devoted both time and talent to the difficult task of seeking scholarship funds for deserving students. And whereas CSF is planning its 17th annual phone-a-thon for the week of March 9th through 13th, 2003, where high school students will contact all North Reading homes by telephone seeking pledges to the CSF Scholarship Fund. Now therefore, we, the Board of Selectmen of North Reading, do hereby proclaim the week of March 9th to 13th, 2003 as CSF Dollars for Scholars Week, and urge all citizens to open their hearts and their purses to the benefit of North Reading students who want to continue their education. Can I have a motion, Mr. Muldoon?
Mr. Chairman, I move to proclaim March 9th to 13th, 2003 as CSF Dollars for Scholars Week in North Reading, according to the attached proclamation.
Second.
Second, the discussion. What I'd like to do at this time is introduce Mr. Dennis Paraska of the Citizen Scholarship Foundation, and perhaps he can introduce some of the student representatives this evening.
Thank you. Citizen Scholarship Fund was started in 1963, and since then we have raised over $500,000 in scholarships, giving away each year. Last year, the phone-a-thon raised over $22,000 from students in North Reading, and we gave away more than $25,000 in scholarships last year to 47 college students. Each year we do the phone-a-thon. It's our major fundraising event. All the money that is collected for the phone-a-thon is used for scholarships this year, and your contributions are 100% tax deductible. If you have other concerns about CSF, we now have a website, which is csfnr.org. We are on the web. I also have tonight 5 students from North Reading High School, the class officers of the senior class, Karen McCullough, Jennifer Silvestro, Alicia Imparato, Nicole Main. Also our student representative, who was a freshman, Jennifer Teresi, is here tonight with us as well. We ask the people of North Reading to be as generous as you can. This is, again, our biggest moneymaker, and we do turn it all over to the students. No student gets less than $500 scholarship when we do give them out. And applications are available at the high school guidance office, superintendent's office, and the library. They must be postmarked by April 1st to be considered for a scholarship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Just hope you do well in the phone-a-thon as well as you've done in prior years.
Thanks very much.
Although it's a difficult economy, but hopefully people will see the value of giving to this worthy cause.
We appreciate the time. Thank you.
I look forward to my phone call. Okay. Can I have we'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Would you like to get a photo with the students if you could? Why don't we go around the front?
Joe, Kevin. What's your name? Jen. Nicole, right?
Only Jim.
I won't touch you. Oh, that's fine. You're going to, yes, you want it. Yeah, that's good.
And many.
We need some. So do they.
Many.
One more. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck, Dennis. See you later. Thank you. The next item on our agenda was discussion with Warren Pierce. Well, I don't see him in the room. So we'll hold off on that. And if he might be tied up. If he fills up, we'll come back to that. We'll move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of February 10th, regular and executive session, and the minutes of February 13th. Budget meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Mulder.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the following minutes as written. February 10th, 2003, regular and executive session. February 13th, 2003, budget meeting.
Second. Motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion is made, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, unanimous. The next item on our agenda is correspondence. Any member wishing to see or discuss any of the correspondence at this time? If anyone would like a copy, please forward it along. And that has to be the shortest list of correspondence I have ever seen. 2 items.
I think it is.
It's nice for a change, isn't it? The next item on our agenda is the 7:45 p.m. public hearing for RMLD Plan 1881 Havel Street. Should get the right plan here. I'll read the notice into the record.
Maybe I missed it. Did we vote on the minutes?
Yes.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
It was unanimous?
I was right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You won.
Okay. Lucky me.
I think you even said yes.
Did I?
Did I get you? Well, now we know how to do
Really
it.
losing.
While you're writing, we take a vote on something. You
There
say
you
yes,
go.
we get what we want. Yeah, we did vote.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All caught up?
I'm here.
Okay. I'll read the notice of public hearing in accordance with Chapter 166 of the Massachusetts General Laws. The public hearing will be held by the Board of Selectmen in Route 14, Town Hall, 235 North Street, North Reading, Mass. On Monday, March 3rd, 2003, at 7:45 p.m. on the petition of Reading Municipal Light Department to locate conduit on Havel Street as described on RMLD Plan Number 1881, dated 11/24/02. And the notice was sent to RMLD and the abutters on February 24th. And we have the request for the petition, which was forwarded to the town engineer, and the town engineer had no objections to the petition. The petitioner is here this evening.
Yes,
If you'd like to address the board and state your name for the record.
Brian Smith for Reading Light Department. We'd like to locate 2 3-inch conduits from the existing pole 8 over 14-1 Haverhill Street. It's located approximately 655 feet northeasterly from the Scotland Heights center line, approximately 10 feet northeasterly into the Memphis Farm subdivision. That's just for the new underground feed into the new subdivision.
Questions from the board? No? Is there anyone here in the audience seeking recognition to discuss this petition? Seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the hearing. Further discussion from the board, Mr. Muldoon.
Mr. Chairman, I move to grant the petition of Reading Municipal Light Department to locate conduit on Haverhill Street as shown in Plan Number 1881 dated 11/24/02.
A motion, do I have a second?
Second.
A Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a continuation of public hearing for RMLD Verizon Plans 1876, 1877, 1878, and 1879. This is for the underground wires in the center of town. As I understand it, Mr. Younger, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, there was a meeting last week. There's still further work to be done by DPW and the HDC, so they're still working through the final details of that, of a potential revised proposal. So, once again, I think what the board should do is continue the hearing for the, I think, third or fourth time. But it's the prudent course of action. So, Mr. Muldoon.
Mr. Chairman, I move to postpone the hearing for the joint petitions of Reading Municipal Light and Verizon New England Incorporated Plans number 1876, 1877, 1878, and 1879 until a date to be determined.
Second.
A motion and a second. Mr. Younger, just for clarification, that means the abutters will be notified again?
Correct.
Okay. So this will, basically, at this point, we're going to take it back to the first stage of the process. But let them work out all the details first so that we don't keep continue, and then we'll go forward with it. Okay. Further discussion from the board? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is for 8 p.m., so we will hold off on that. Why don't we move down? Actually, why don't we jump ahead to item 9, if we could. License renewal for Shaw's. Mr. Muldoon.
Mr. Chairman, I move to renew the common victualler license for Shaw's Supermarkets Incorporated, 265 Main Street, subject to all regulatory department requirements to expire December 31st, 2003.
A motion, do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion is made, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? We'll move to item 10 on the agenda, which are appointments, reappointments. Mr. Vino.
Yes, I'm fine. Mr. Chairman, I move to place into nomination the following names for appointment to the Veterans Memorial Committee. William McDonald, 158 North Street, Edward Piercy, 10 Upton Ave.
A motion, do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Discussion? Mr.
Yes,
Vino.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, this appointment had to be postponed because of, just so we were sure we had the proper notification in the paper. I had spoke to Mr. Callahan a month and a half or so ago. And I spoke to Mr. McDonald, and I did make an attempt to get a hold of Mr. Piercy, but I was not able to get a hold of him. But Mr. Callahan told me he had, and I would recommend their appointment. They've been working diligently with the Veterans Memorial Committee for some time.
Okay. Questions from the board? And a motion and a second. Seeing no further questions, this will be a roll call vote. The members may vote for two candidates. Mr. Callaghan.
William McDonald and Edward Piercy.
Mr. Vino.
William McDonald, Edward Piercy.
Ms. Bailey.
William McDonald, Edward Piercy.
Mr. Muldoon.
William McDonald, Edward Piercy.
And the chair votes William McDonald, Edward Piercy. You have no other appointments this evening?
Not that I know.
Okay. want to move to item 11, which is a review of the building fees. Mr. Young.
Yes, we have Mr. DeCola here. As previously stated, I submitted the building permit fee recommendations from Mr. DeCola and the electrical inspector and the plumbing and gas inspector for their approval. According to Mr. DeCola, in review of our files, the last time the fees were increased were in 1989 by the Board of Selectmen. I haven't received, not received any questions from the board regarding the fees or permits, recommended fees. If the board wishes to act upon this, you may draft a motion to accept the fees as presented by Mr. DeCola.
Questions from Mr. Vino?
Yes. I did look at this pretty much in depth, Jim. I tried to read it. And I don't want to say it bothers me, but there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason how these fees went up. In other words, some went up 50%, some went up 25%. In other words, just for an example, a RAS permit residential went from 25 to 50, which is 100%, and a RAS permit commercial went from 50 to 75. It just doesn't, I don't know how these were determined, or if there was a...
Well, I did a comparison with 11 different towns, and some of the fees were lower than others. That's why they didn't all just go up the same percentage. Compared with the others, and the cities and towns that haven't raised are in the process of raising. Most of them are way behind, and it's been long overdue. It's been 14 years since North Reading has raised any fees in the building department.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, for me, I'm not opposed to raising the fees, Mr. DeCola. It just seems like, and granted, I'm picking out that one,
Yep.
but put more of the burden on the homeowner than we are on the commercial property. And I think, without going through the whole list, I found that to be the case in quite a few of these. I'm not opposed to it. I was just trying to.
If I may, to raise a structure, both commercially and residential went up $25 each. If you want to raise a structure, raising permit, residential, commercial, each fee went up $25. So it's
Right.
proportional.
But me, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
the residential went up 100%. The commercial went up 50%. Yeah, I'm just,
But they each went up $25.
well, that's the way I look at it.
I understand
Yeah,
that, but it's
right.
how it,
No, I'm
you know,
not
the
opposed to it.
the occupancy permits, those changed as well, and the residential, didn't go up. So it's,
No, I'm not going to vote against it. I just wanted to bring that up.
where does this, if I may, Mr. DeCola, this is your recommendation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and this brings us in line with surrounding
With
communities?
the surrounding towns, yes.
Are we at or above in any particular category, or?
We're lower in some, mostly we're right there. There are towns that are higher in total fees. So I took an average, we're right there in the middle where we should be.
And we were, I assume, far below in many categories, having not touched them in 14 years.
Yes.
Other questions from the board? Mr. Mulder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in favor of raising these fees. There were, and going through them, most of them were very reasonable in that they were raised for an incremental amount that was reasonable. But there were 5 that kind of stuck out in my mind here that I saw that I just would like an explanation, because I don't want to get caught off guard about these large increases. They were in the electrical permit fees. Kitchen went from 30 to, most of these are 15, 30, 25, and they went up to 40, 50, which seems reasonable and not a large jump. There were 5 that went up very large, 30 to 100. Kitchen, second floor, single dormer, second floor, full dormer, garage triple, and 400 amp and over. And I just wanted to see what your reasoning behind those 4, why they went up by $70 versus 20 to 25 on the other ones.
Which one? It was kitchen, second floor?
Kitchen, second floor, single dormer, second floor, full dormer. Actually, second floor, full dormer went from $30 to $200. That's pretty large jump.
That,
Garage triple, 30 to 100, 400 amp and over went from 30 to 100.
yeah, that was, I mean, the attempt there was to simplify it. What we were doing, we would be adding up the individual outlets. I mean, the kitchen takes most of your circuits, and if you put down, like if it was $10 per circuit, a lot of towns did that. So it was an attempt to just lump it into one fee, rather than having the electricians list everything. You know, $15 for the smoke detectors, you know, $10 for the dishwasher, $20 for the microwave, and list every single thing. If you're doing a kitchen, we do the one fee of $100 for a kitchen remodel. And it was an attempt to simplify the whole process. And that's why it looks like it's a huge jump. Some of them were ridiculous. The 400 amp, over 400 amp service, $30, that was ridiculous. You know, that should have been $200 right from the back. So I mean, that's why it looks like a huge jump. It was so below what every other city and town was charging.
How about the second floor full dormer went from 30 to 200?
That's the full dormer was a total second floor raise, so where they take the roof off and bring everything upstairs with the 3 bedrooms and a bath. And again, it was just to total everything rather than go through the bath, each bedroom, the smoke detectors in every bedroom, you know, maybe 6, 7 outlets in every bedroom. And it was just to try to lump the entire project into one fee.
This kind of situation is basically one where someone's putting a full dormer and you're gaining a whole second floor.
You're gaining the whole second floor, exactly.
So you-
So you're doubling your square footage in that house.
So it sounds like it's a lot of work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Mr. Nicola, my understanding of fees are that they can only cover the cost of the service. So if it says based on the 2002, these new fees would have produced $85,000 and $95,000 in new revenue. A town council report or memorandum that we've received in the past said that it has to be dollar for dollar in matching up the cost of providing the service that the fee is paying for. Are these increases, because there's not an increase in your budget, so how will these dollar for dollar match up with the cost of the service being provided?
My understanding is that it's not just the building department budget. I mean, these fees will actually, they kick in when the assessor goes back out, when they take in when the CPC, when they've applied to CPC. And so it's right down the line. Board of Health reviews every permit. So I don't think it's just the building department budget that's covered in the cost. I think it's the almost 70% of town hall that these permits go through.
Mr. Younger, is that the dollar for dollar aspect of this? Are we going to be out of compliance by raising our fees if the cost of, I mean, what we're charging now, are we covering our building inspectors' fees, these inspection fees, with what the cost of these inspections with the fees we're charging now?
Well, if you, Mr. Callaghan, as you remember, we reduced our building departments operational the past year and a half. Obviously, with these fees coming back in, it was the board's desire to bring the department back up to where it was regarding personnel, regarding expenses, because we didn't have this revenue coming in, so therefore, part of it was we reduced the personnel hours.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oops.
Mrs. Bailey?
Just so I understand here, the building department's budget is about $177,000 proposed, and these fees are 80, these fees would only be about half the budget.
Correct.
So unless, I understand that the building department may do other things, but most of its work is in code enforcement, it's in the permit area, so I wouldn't see that, if the income from the fees is half that of the budget, I guess it would be a hard point to prove that the fees were exceeding it. I'm just asking that, if that's a way to look, is that a way to
That's one way to
look at it for you,
That's
Mr. Chairman?
one way to look at it, yeah.
Um,
And also, if I may though, is to add on to that, it is not just the building department. When you put on that whole second floor, perhaps they went before ZBA, and there's work there, there's the Board of Health,
Everything was
there's the
physical.
assessors, everything Mr. DePaula mentioned. So I don't think the fees necessarily are going to put us above the cost of providing the service.
And just, I guess in brief, from what I've seen and looked online of other counties, permit fees, I think this brings us much more in line with the market rate. And other folks in other towns I've talked to said if you haven't increased your fees in the last 10 or 12 years,
Could be we missed the time.
you're definitely due. So I support these and thank Mr. DeCola for the thoroughness of his presentation.
Mr. DeVito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeCola, one more question. On the plumbing, this is more of a curiosity question. On the repairs and alterations, replacement of 1 to 3 fixtures, would that be like a kitchen faucet? You would have to get a $30 permit? What is a fixture, I guess is what I'm asking.
It would
Change your faucet this weekend?
No.
Yeah, if they were to replace the sink and the faucet, that would be one fixture. The sink or the,
Faucet, is that included? I didn't do it. I just wanted to know, if you had a plumber coming in and does he need a permit for $30
that would be.
to replace just the faucet?
What number, Rock?
No. Gonna get my trash. It's in my digs. No,
It would be
Pick
one
it up
fixture.
anyway.
It would
It's gonna be there next week.
Don't go there.
Thank you.
I'd just like to comment, I think this is great. I also like the approach that you took in terms of, the kitchens and some of those things, where you took a whole approach as opposed to counting up, because from an administrative perspective, as well as, I think that, for a lot of homeowners, I think that there's a benefit to $100 for the whole kitchen versus if you're counting up each fixture and service drop in there. So I think that's a reasonable approach to that. Other questions for the board? Mr. Muldoon, do you have a motion?
I said the board decided to draft the motion right now, a motion just to accept the Mr. DeCola's fees as presented.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the building permit fees as written.
Second.
Motion, further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion is made, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you, Mr. DeCola. Okay, we will move back now to item 7, which was an 8 PM public hearing for street acceptance. We have Mr. Rogers here from the TPC.
Should we have 2 roads up for acceptance? Lady Slipper Lane, Bridle Way, Wilkins Bridle Way subdivision. Planning Commission will sign these plans tomorrow night. Ask the Board of Selectmen to sign them tonight. They're both constructed according to town regulations. Inspected. The punch list items left in the before town meeting, otherwise they're ready for acceptance. Two sets of Mylar, sets of paper plans.
Do we, just procedural, we sign before the CPC?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Matter of scheduling our meetings tomorrow.
Wasn't there a question about some water gates or something that was brought up the other evening?
Those are some of the punch list items that will have to be put on the as-built plan. These are the acceptance plans.
I was under the impression we were gonna wait until we had everything.
I was as well, which is why I asked the procedural question.
Typically, we'll sign the acceptance plans, and then they have a punch list of items to complete by town meeting. We hold off recommendations until town meeting. If the punch list items aren't complete, we don't accept. But we sign these ahead of time so that everything's ready.
If I may, I would just prefer to wait to make the recommendation at town meeting then in that case, so that it's not, it doesn't appear in the warrant as being recommended beforehand. Is it?
That's what I said. We still
Right.
sign the plans typically ahead of time. You hold your
But
recommendation.
yeah, if I may.
Two different things.
Two different issues, but I'm not saying I disagree with you.
Yeah.
Two different issues. One is, when do we sign the plan? And the other is our recommendation. Our recommendation, we agreed the other night, I thought, we agreed that, you know, unless we saw a really fast melt, our recommendation was gonna be made on town meeting floor.
Right.
And it was also gonna be keyed off of the recommendation of CPC. The other issue, though, is that my recollection is we've always signed these plans after the CPC has signed them.
Last year, I think you signed them before we did too. It's just a matter of schedule. If you want to wait a week, I can bring them back. But
Is it an issue if we wait? I'd prefer to see their signatures on them. If I signed them last year without their signatures, I don't recall, and I typically wouldn't do something like that, just like Mr. Younger knows, I won't sign anything unless I have a chance to read it, no matter how fast. Is that an issue?
not with me, not my road.
Questions? But if we hold off signing them until after CPC signed them, that's not going to
We're
hold up
signing
the...
them tomorrow night.
They'll be signing them tomorrow night. We're meeting on Wednesday, so we could, can we sign them Wednesday night? Put them on the
You can
agenda?
continue this till the,
Till, can I continue it to Wednesday?
you can do it Wednesday or continue to the 10th.
Or we just continue it to Wednesday? I think we're going to do that. Anyone from the public here seeking recognition on these, on Bridle Way or Lady Slipper Lane? Sir?
I had an invitation here to be present here at 8 o'clock, and I'm here to hear about what's going to happen to between Bridle Way, Slipper Lane, and the connection with Equestrian. I believe it's Equestrian Lane. If there's going to be a couple of ways cut and where. Says here that Selectmen North Reading hereby gives notice in their intention to lay out a town way from Bridle Way, Slipper Lane.
They're intended to accept those 2 roads as public streets to be owned by the town, rather than by the developer.
And they're going to cut the streets first, right? Or the streets are maybe there already.
The streets are already there, they're already built.
Oh,
Bridle Way.
I thought it was some new easement of some type where they see the right to go with bulldozers.
The private roads right now, this is proposing to make the public
Okay, then I misunderstood the point. I didn't have to be here at all. But it was very interesting so far to hear all of you.
If you think that was interesting, stick around.
Interesting.
Gets
How
better.
things are moving in town. Well, thank you. You got the answer.
Mr. Chairman, I move to continue the hearing until Wednesday, March 5th.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion is made, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, unanimous? Okay, Mr. Rogers, we will sign on Wednesday.
Do I have a time?
Hmm?
Do I have a time?
It doesn't, it's a continuation, it doesn't need a time certain, does it?
How about 6:01?
Well, if you continue a public hearing, you're supposed to continue to a time certain, otherwise you can close the public hearing.
6:01. 6:01.
We need a new motion then?
Just move, new motion to make it 6:01.
Just do the motion again, Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, I move to continue the hearing on Lady Slipper Lane and Bridal Way until Wednesday, March 5th at 6:01 PM.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous? Okay. Now you have the time, Mr. Rogers, 6:01.
Okay.
We'll probably stop it, just for fun. Okay, we'll move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the April town meeting issues and the budget meetings. And we have some departments here with us this evening. Just to clarify, we're not, I don't envision we'll make final decisions on any budget this evening. This is just an opportunity for the individual liaison to give us the status of where they're at, and for the department heads to provide the board their input as well. And obviously, because of the tight constraints of the budget, we will need to sort of take everything in before we make a final decision. I'd love to be able to take them one at a time and make final decisions, but I don't think that this budget process and the tightness of the budget is going to lend itself to that. Having said that, I would like to give Mr. Younger and/or Mr. Dow an opportunity to review with the board their total picture. So, Mr. Younger,
Thank you. As of this morning, actually late this afternoon, the recommended general government budget by myself is $9,999,921. That is below the FY03 amount of $10,275,176. Looking at available revenues, and including the snow and ice deficit that has to be paid, and my recommendation is that $210,000 will be coming out of cell tower revenue, and covering our retirements and other uses of revenue, and making the assumption of a level funded school department budget, we should have a zero deficit going into town meeting. This assumption is based on the following. General government, no current vacant positions will be filled. Overtime has been reduced in all departments. Unnecessary expenses have been reduced. No small capital items have been included. Any place where there was a possibility of reduction on the expense side, even if it was $50, was made. Unfortunately, you would like to fill positions that were vacant, can't do it. But nobody under this budget will be laid off.
And this is clarification of everything, this is your proposed budget.
My proposed
Not-
budget.
Okay, so, this budget, like the department head's budget, is for the consideration of the board. So we take all of this in, synthesize it down and agree or agree to disagree or whatever, and we still don't have final numbers from the school department. And some of these numbers, although these, at this point, the revenue numbers are pretty firm.
Yes, as you can see under the revenue numbers, we did not have huge increases on license and permits, fines and forfeits, and on fees. As my goal was not to base our budget on any FY04 increases, because at this point, obviously, with the fees of Mr. DeCola, we would assume that they would be coming up higher. We don't know, it's not a good base to judge that on.
Right, and if you build in that increase based on this year's permits, and in an economy that we're in today, you could put yourself in an awkward position. So it's, conservatism would say, don't build those in. And then the other part to that, I think, that it's important, Mr. Younger and I spoke about, is that to the extent that the budget has been further tightened from the current fiscal year, the free cash continues to shrink, because free cash is generated by not fully expending all of the funds. And as we ratchet down expenditures, natural evolution says that that's going to generate less free cash. So that also, that's another reason or rationale to hold back on just building in those fee increases as an automatic, oh, we're going to get this pile of money. So we're not changing the fee structure. We're changing the fee structure because it needs to be changed. We're not changing the fee structure. And personally, I can't support changing the fee structure to generate additional revenue that we'll spend now, because we're spending money we may never see. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions. Sure. One, the numbers on this projection and that, and on the budget that you put forth, that is predicated on what percentage cut in state aid?
Okay, first on Mr. Kelly, tomorrow you'll have an actual breakdown of where all the reductions are. This was
Okay.
printed out this afternoon. I wanted to make sure with George that my numbers balanced out with that to reach that area. Now that it's reached there, I can show where they are. That's based on the local aid projections presentation that the governor had given in his budget.
Is there a percentage of that assigned to that?
The percentage, we received a 10.5% reduction in local aid. Amongst all the other communities, actually in our areas, all received 10.5% reductions.
Okay, so that's what these numbers are based upon then?
That's correct.
It is predicated on the governor's budget.
Right, okay.
Which was the 10 point.
Okay, that's, and the second thing is, in terms of salaries, is even the union, well, I don't know if we've signed anything yet officially.
We have
The salary pool, according to Mr. Bell, is included in those numbers.
without saying too
Right, the
much.
numbers that have been discussed then is what's been
The-
figured in.
The contracts that we did sign one, and the contracts that we are discussing are two?
Well, there's a non-union.
Oh,
department
right,
heads.
right. I'm sorry, I don't
Right.
think of the non-union one. But everything we've discussed
Right.
is built in.
So we've signed the what, the
We
library?
signed with the library and the non-union personnel
And the
contract.
others went
But we
back
didn't
to
sign
us.
it, that's why I didn't, we don't officially sign that.
Okay, so
But
that,
all the other contracts that we have discussed,
right.
that's the same question I had for Mr. Younger. when he told
Okay,
me.
so if those,
It's built in.
if
Built
I
in.
could ask this without, I know,
Yeah, it's-
violating
Careful.
anything from executive session. if the numbers that we have discussed are accepted by the unions, then this is still a non-layoff budget that you're putting forth here tonight.
Under my scenario, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to add on to that, if I could. The employees currently on staff aren't laid off, but there are vacant positions
Right.
throughout the general government
That will not be filled.
that will continue to remain vacant. So there is an impact to various departments throughout the community as it relates to that.
Right, I just wanted to make it clear though that
No, I
if
understand.
where we are right now, in terms of that, it's all accounted for, in terms of a no layoff, if those contracts were to be approved under those terms that have been discussed.
Right. Yeah, you would make it a different.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That- Okay.
Mr. Younger.
And, Mr. Chairman, as we continue, though, during FY04, once it's approved, any positions that do become vacant will be on a case-by-case basis, and not necessarily an automatic.
An audit refill.
Right.
Yeah, because nothing to say the next year looks any better. Any, Mr. Mulder?
I think it's extremely important to point out that in our last revenue and appropriation projection, which was on February 27th, we had a $772,000 deficit. And that whatever these moves that have been made is bringing that down to zero. Whether it's accepted or not by us, what you've done, it still is it's dealing with a $772,000 deficit. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, if you look at it, obviously, the first bit, the snow and ice deficit, was not covered. That's covered now under the cell tower revenue, so it's $210,000 there. Also, going back into each budget, if you go back, the police had the positions in there. They had each position will be retired this year. We also had a position to cover Officer Rowe. If not, I'm assuming Officer Rowe returning hopefully sometime this month. And my assumption is it is, but if he's called out again, the intention is not to fill that position once he is sent out again. The current position of the children's librarian, we recommend it not be filled at this point. Also, we just reduced overtime across the board, all departments. Looking at that, also expenses. Small capital went up, $115,000 went out of the police department for small capital, $52,000 went out of the fire department for small capital. As I said, overtime police, fire police reduced, overtime public works reduced. We used $47,000 in administration. General services, which includes the library department, fire capital, police capital, some police expense, fire expense, DPW expense. Everybody across the board, even minimally, I think maybe even $100 out of ZBA.
You killed us.
But
You
everybody.
mean they had a whole 100?
No, we're now 11 cents over budget.
We want it.
We're gonna pass that.
This year.
No, they want it. I think, Mr. Younger, in both the February 27 and the March 3rd projections, both of those leave the school department at level funding.
That's correct,
So
there's
you're
no
not
assumptions
playing with
based on that.
that number. And then we still need to see where they're not done with their budget deliberations as well. This is something to go by and tell us where we stand. And This is a different approach than we've done in the past. Mrs. Bailey?
Yes, I just had a few specific questions. On the licenses and permits, the $30,900 increase, is that the liquor licenses? Because we said we weren't going to account for increases in that FY04. What is that increase attributable to?
Generally, George, you usually go 10%, small minimal increase in fees generally annually, so that was his 10% increase.
Okay. And I guess the only other comment is that I would like to understand what these cuts translate into
Sure.
service-wise, you know, the public safety budget, despite, you know, this public safety budget has empty positions, but it's about level funded, so what does that mean in service cuts there versus DPW, which has close to $200,000 in administration? So I need, you know, these are numbers, but I need to know what that means for the citizens.
No, that's fine, I'll be going tomorrow. We just needed to have the numbers balanced by George Road to make sure that it reached that level in the day-to-day, so.
And will department, these are your numbers, and obviously we're gonna be speaking with the department heads. Will we give them a budget and they can suggest different reductions, or how are we gonna approach that if they have to
Then
make a number?
there needs to be a lot of dialogue between Mr. Younger, Mr. Dowd, and the department head, as well as the budget liaisons and again, we don't have the nitty-gritty details of these. And I'm not, because Mr. Younger finished this late last night, but that's when I heard about it for the first time as well. So I think, to your point, the department heads need to have input to this and need to discuss with Mr. Younger, and he needs to discuss with them. And it's a fluid process, and liaisons need to stay plugged in, particularly when they see numbers for the areas that they're assigned to. It's my hope that we don't have, not my hope, it would be a goal that I think we need to meet as a board, and more importantly, Mr. Younger needs to meet, is to make sure that the department heads are clear, so that the budget that's printed in the warrant and the budget that goes before town meeting, that the department heads are not seeing it or hearing it for the first time. That doesn't mean they'll hear about it with a lot of advance warning, because this is a very fluid process, and he's trying to keep things in balance. So, and again, we're not done by a long shot. This is his proposal. We have to get through the budget. We have to understand. We have to make sure that our priorities are reflected in these numbers, and to the extent that they're not, then these numbers will need to be adjusted, and this will be a very, very fluid process over the next 2 weeks. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the department heads were given some direction, ways back, I should say. These numbers, and I know these numbers are all new last night, as Mr. Murphy just said, and Mr. Younger just worked these out. Are the numbers here pretty much in line with the guidelines that had been set for the department heads? Or are we looking at major cutting going back from where they started from as well?
No, I mean, there is some changes, as I stated to them, if we had reached like the 5% or 10, 5% level, pretty much staying that. Once that changed, everything was off the board, because I said there was no guarantee that there would be equal amongst departments based
Right.
on.
There wasn't going to be 5% across the board.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Okay. So they have been, if I may, they have been given the instructions, I guess, to develop budgets at various cut levels.
Well, the way we looked at it, met with them on Wednesday, after the governor's local aid came out. Said the numbers obviously don't look good. easiest route would be layoffs. Biggest chunk of money, easiest way to go. Problem with that is, you're hurting services. You're hurting certain departments have one individual, two individuals. Look at it this way, my goal was if I could bring this down without hurting the services to the greatest degree. And looking at, should the schools come in with a level funded budget, putting that to the
That's
equation. Right. Putting that, this is what I have left over. So hit that as your target, and brought yourself down to that area. Obviously, right now, I've met with some departments on this because we're doing this during the day, did that last night, met with some during the day. And that's the goal, and this is to get there. If the philosophy is different, the philosophy is to make personnel reductions, then obviously you can put some of the money back in there. My goal at this time was not to make personnel reductions.
And to speak to the point Mrs. Bailey brought up, we'll have the opportunity with the department heads to go over how they prioritize their budget. Right, I mean, when they come in, that's going to be part of the process.
Right.
So,
I think I jumped over too quick, because I don't think Mrs. Bailey finished.
No, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just have to say that I feel a little bit confused tonight because my budget liaison assignments are next on the agenda, and I don't know what these cuts mean for those budgets, and to discuss them with the department heads who may or may not know or have heard from them late today. I feel that's real, I'm gonna be hearing some of those things for the first time tonight, and as a liaison, I thought it was my job to review them with the department heads, to make sure that we could come with an organized presentation. I'm happy to visit my departments tonight, but we may have to revisit them again from scratch, because I do not know what these cuts, and I'm not prepared to address these cuts, and I don't know whether the department heads that I've worked with are either. So I just need to say that we may need to put all my departments on the agenda again. I don't know what's going on.
If that's the case, that's the case. It's a very fluid process. This is Mr. Younger's presentation. I don't think while he can provide, when we have the discussion with those departments that you're liaison for this evening, he can provide comments regarding what he's proposing in here that relate to that department. But again, my comments at the outset, I'm not necessarily going to make final determinations on any budget. I think it's still too fluid a process, and we still have a ways to go. And again, I think we need to hear from the liaison and hear from the department head, because that may be 180 degrees from what's being proposed by Mr. Younger. And I don't know the details of all of this either. I mean, to his credit, he's working to balance the budget, and that's as the town administrator, that's what he needs to do. He's working with Mr. Dow to do that, and he's working with his department heads to do that. But we still need to make decisions and set priorities, and by all means, if we need to put departments back on the agenda again, or if we need to, and I think one of the things that we needed, that I wish we'd done last year, that we should do, is that when we make the final decision on the budget, we should make sure all department heads are there so they can understand what's in there. Because again, there tended to be people who said that they didn't know that that's what their budget was. That was after the warrant was printed, so that was somewhat perplexing to me. But again, it's the liaison and the department head need to be advocates for those budgets. Mr. Younger needs to be an advocate for a total budget that's in balance, that addresses the priorities that he's come to a consensus with his department heads on, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, it's a very fluid process.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Dean.
First, I want to thank Mr. Younger for coming forward with this projected sheet. but I do share the concerns that Mrs. Bailey has. I mean, we have the police department scheduled for Wednesday night, and I have a number, but I don't have the actual cuts yet. I don't know if the chief has seen them yet. And we'll be discussing them Wednesday night. I'm not clear. I'm not exactly clear now how we're doing this. I don't want to have to bring the police department back in again. If this is the case, I'd rather postpone them for Wednesday night. And, well, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
You'll have the numbers in the whole package tomorrow.
But I need time to speak with the chief on the cuts. I mean, I will do it Wednesday night here if that's, I can't do this in 24 hours. This is the problem. I just can't schedule it. But I'm willing to do it Wednesday night. But, and I appreciate the effort, but I'm not gonna have time to actually have another meeting with the chief and the lieutenant before Wednesday night.
But you met, I don't know, maybe I'm just not articulating, or maybe I just not coming from the same place. You met with an individual department, and you had a discussion about their budget as they presented what they saw as the shortcomings of what they presented, and I presume that they didn't present everything that they wanted, because they had a set of guidelines they went by. So as the liaison, you can present to the board what the budget was that the department had prepared, where that budget fell short, what it met, what it didn't meet, why you would advocate for it being increased, or why you would advocate for it being reduced further. And this is a separate part of the process. I mean, the town administrator, this isn't new. The town administrator prepares his budget recommendation, and that is not the same as it has been in the past, and it's my hope that we get the end of this process, it is in the future. But the department head has a budget, the town administrator has a budget, and the board of selectmen have a budget. And what we work towards is trying to get all three of those things lined up. So,
I understand, but I guess if I could ask Mr. Younger a question, then, Mr. Younger, in the budget book on TA recommends, is this going to change those numbers?
Yes, Mr. Dow, put them
Well,
in.
that's, I have to see it, because
Mr.
that's the
Chairman.
numbers we went on.
Please recall, we lost $552,000 Wednesday afternoon. I had to make the adjustments
I can
to
understand that.
cover that.
I
Their
need
budgets.
time.
Mr. Callahan.
Thank you. What the questions I asked before was, and I don't know if this helps to clarify it at all. When I was asking if the department heads were able to anticipate these cuts, I would think that at this point, department heads had known cuts were coming, and were kind of in the, I guess what I would call it, instead of the cutting phase of the budget, more along the lines of almost a tweaking phase of the budget, for lack of a better word, where time is tight. I think most of the departments, though, at this point, I think it would be safe to say, have worked their budgets out, and that now if there's a slight adjustment in the numbers, that they're not gonna be starting back at scratch. So, I'm just saying, I think as the departments come in, we will be able to pull all three budgets together, Mr. Younger's, the board's, and the department heads. And I think we're at that stage now. So, although time is tight, it was tight anyways, so I don't think this sets us back. If anything, I think this helps us, because it's some solid numbers now that we have in front of us.
Tells us where we stand.
Exactly.
Okay. Now we go to some budgets. Are they all yours tonight?
They are.
Okay.
Well, okay. I guess I'd like to start with a few general comments. I certainly appreciate Mr. Younger's work to balance the budget. I don't want to say that I don't. As we go through the budgets tonight, I'd like to hear Mr. Younger's recommendations, because I don't know what they are, and I'm somewhat speaking in a vacuum there, and the numbers that I present you will not agree with what Mr. Younger does, so if we can maybe go through that and see where line items have changed, so the department heads are all here tonight would have a chance to respond to that in some way. I guess just the other brief general comment before we go department by department is when I looked through all the budgets and when I sign the warrant each week, I have a general question about how certain in-house services that are common across the town are handled, like printer service contracts, cell phones, pagers. I see several different vendors on the warrant, and I guess I just wondered whether there was some dollar savings and economies of scale in having one cell phone service contract for the whole town, which I could be mistaken, but I don't believe we are, because when I sign the warrant, I see different cell phone vendors, and I know that, for example, Mr. DeCola has requested cell phones this year, and, it's my impression that it wasn't as part of, the town contract, we got another cell phone and it costs X dollars, that there was somewhat department heads going off and maybe picking what served, shopping around and picking what served their department best, but not kind of a unified purchasing contract for the town. So can we, I think that applies to all the budgets, so can we just hear a little bit about that from the town administrator?
Sure. For some economy of scale, you're correct. We're not totally uniform with all the phones. That's the goal that we are trying to reach. As far as copy of contracts and such, we are taking them off the state bid list, and we're trying to keep them as uniform as possible. When we're bringing on new copies or no new copies on this.
Is that decision centralized at all, or is it made within the individual department?
No, I have to approve it. Purchase orders
So-
have to be approved.
Are we only purchasing Canon copiers, or are we getting, this one has a Canon, and this one has a Xerox, and this one has another?
I mean, I think right now at this point, we're trying to get them all in the same, budgetarily, if it makes sense financially, but if you're looking at a Canon copier that you need a small one, and you have a Canon copier that's $2,000, and you have a Xerox that's $1,000, it makes sense.
Makes it tough.
Yeah, so you basically go for what is actually the most economical. We'd like to keep everything amongst the same, but if there is a big difference for that particular design, we'd probably go for lower cost one. As far as stationery supplies, we're all under the same uniform. We got the same vendor for stationery supplies. We don't go out with different stationery supply vendors.
What about, actually, maybe some of the DP data processing stuff we'll be discussing Wednesday? So maybe we can talk about some of those issues then. But what do, Bailey brings up a valid point, the cell phones,
I know we've been in the
I'm not
process.
trying to micromanage.
No, we have been in the process.
She brings up a valid point.
We have been in the process of reviewing the cell phones. It's not totally completed. We have one program for cell phones. Certain cases of public safety needs, I think there may be a difference between a certain type of cell phone and a general type cell phone, where you may not be able to have the same type of service.
But, no, I understand there's different levels of service, and there's different, there are different providers that provide those things, and then, there's always the deal of the week, if you will. But we are trying to centralize those things, right, to some.
But beyond economy of scale, sometimes centralization of buying all Canon copiers may not be the most economical plan either, depending upon the type of copier you need or type of copy.
If- Yeah, just one. So if an individual department gets cell phones, they can contract for that on their own?
They have to go through us. They have to go through George and myself.
Okay, so there's an opportunity to review and so,
Right.
and that's really what I wanted to get.
Right. They cannot PO it on their own, purchase order on their own.
So if someone's looking for a cell phone and another department already has a contract, they can try to piggyback on that contract and either get a better rate for themselves or get a better rate for both departments by
Okay.
piggyback.
We've had question POs regarding cell phones. Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yeah, my question along those lines is not to micromanage, but anytime we can gain an economy of scale, we can keep a service.
Right.
And that's what my question goes to, and that if you can contract with a single cell phone contractor and indicate to them that perhaps they will be the provider of choice for the town, you might be able to get a better deal. And like I said, this is all aimed at economy of scale to keep service, and not to micromanage. Okay. So I get to pick
I
which
wasn't
budget we go?
replying, you was. Okay.
So I get to pick which budget?
You, Mrs. Bailey, you have the floor.
Okay, let's start with the library. I handed out a sheet, a two-sided sheet. Mrs. Vinton, our library director, is here, along with Diane Norris, the chair of our library board of trustees, and Lorraine, she is a library trustee as well, and Marilyn Henderson, a friend of the library and an advocate of the library, so I thank them for their attendance here tonight. I handed out a sheet, and I'll just be brief and then turn it over to Mrs. Minchin and Mrs. Norris. If you remember last year, the big issue was a budget to remain, for the library to remain certified, which means three key things. They can continue to get state aid, they can continue to apply for grants, and that they do not risk interlibrary loans with surrounding communities. The library municipal appropriation requirement, this minimum certification budget for fiscal year 2004 is $392,045. That differs slightly. You'll see in your budget book the proposed $392,590. That's, we can work that out. That's rounding essentially. It's a few $100s, and you know, we would welcome questions. On one side of the sheet shows what we need to remain certified. On the other side is the State Board of Library Commissioners certification policy, and you'll see to apply for a waiver, which was spoken about last year, is a long and complex process. They only may grant a waiver, you know, upon their discretion, and to not more than 10 cities and towns in the Commonwealth each year. And if you'll note in section 3B under the waiver review process, at the end of section 3B, it notes that as evidence of need for a waiver, they will look at things like state aid, rank, per capita personal income, valuation, et cetera. All things that our 10.5% decrease in state aid shows that we rank on the high side of. So I would like to encourage the board as a goal to seek the municipal appropriation requirement of $392,045. And I'll turn it over to Mrs. Minton, Mrs. Norris. Anything I might like to add?
Thank you. Would also like to seek the MAR, the municipal appropriation requirement figure, which is what we're operating at this year. And in the budget I received today, faxed to me from Mr. Dow, our budget's been cut substantially, and that includes cutting the children's librarian position, which was, we were only funding it part-time anyway at 25 hours. And that brings us down about 40,000 below the MAR. We're open 44 hours a week now, which keeps us in the certification range. I think we can cut 4 more hours, and then we would be in danger of losing certification in the next year. And, Mr. Norris?
Yeah, I'd like actually to get a clarification from Mr. Younger, if I could. I'm confused about whether or not you are not filling vacant positions in all departments or just reducing the vacant positions.
I'm not budgeting them, that's
They're not being funded as opposed to not being filled. Right.
correct.
This position was originally funded as a full-time position, and then it was reduced to a part-time position because of the uncertainty of the time. And at the time that we didn't fill it, there was an expectation that by keeping it, we would optimistically hope for better times. The times are so uncertain that we didn't know where we were going to be going with this. And actually served to the benefit of the town when it needed to reduce spending because of the reduction in state aid in this fiscal year. Because we not only reduced spending in other categories, but we didn't fill the part-time children's librarian. So you got the combined benefit of those two, the reduction in the operating budget plus the unfilled position. We are concerned that by not funding it, we are able to stay open with the staff stretched very thin, but we're able to stay open. We're concerned that if we remove this money from the budget and this funding for the children's librarian, we will not be able to do the long-term opening of the library for 40 or 44 hours because of the nature of the work. And you can ask people to do almost anything for a short time. It's not reasonable to ask them to provide that same level of service for the whole year. And I certainly appreciate the dilemma Mr. Younger is in. The budget information not only being late is formatted such a way that we're not even sure what the numbers are, and that the time this debate goes on at the legislature, our budget will be all finished. When they start to debate it and maybe change things, our state aid could increase. If we have no funding for this position, it will already be gone from the budget.
This won't come as a surprise to Mr. Younger, but I spoke, actually spoke to Mrs. Bailey today as well. I for one, think that the board, and I would concur with Mrs. Bailey, I think the board needs to work towards having this budget funded at the minimum requirement, which means we need to figure out how and where to get that from. I think that the response to the last budget process and what we saw at the October town meeting, the comments that I had from the residents of the community, both young and old, before and after the last budget and the October town meeting, convinced me that this needs to be a priority for the community. And I think that we can't try to hang a hat on a potential waiver. I think that the library and the trustees and the library staff, and I know the Friends of the Library are trying to gear up a little more. It's a very valuable, fabulous resource for the entire community, and we need to give it at least that minimum level of support. I'd love to give it more, but I think we need to give it at least that minimum level of support. We can't jeopardize that other funding, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but that's where I'm coming from on it. And I will work with Mr. Younger and Mr. Dow and my book, my budget book, when I get it from work, sharing with Joe tonight. I will work to find that level of funding that brings you there. I can't guarantee I'll do it or that I'll be successful doing it, but that's my personal promise to you, because I think that's critical. I think I heard the people of North Reading say that that's important to them, and it certainly was. It's certainly important to me, and I think last year we might have missed it a little bit by not funding at that level to begin with, and we jeopardized things. We were able to write it in October, but let's not come out of the gate wrong, and you're absolutely right, we may get, what comes out of the legislature may be better than the governor's budget. I certainly hope so too, but I'm not gonna hang my hat on that, and, excuse me, and it could also be worse, or it could be just different in different kinds of ways. So I think that coming out of the gate, we need to have a budget that brings you to the minimum level. So that would be my view on that. Mr. Callen?
Yes. I also want to echo what Mr. Murphy said. I think it's imperative that we fund at the minimum requirements, so we don't go through what we had to in October. At the same time, you know, one of the other variables in this all might be not just, you know, less of a reduction in state aid or more of a reduction in state aid, but I've also heard, or I should say read in the newspaper of some talk in terms of easing of state requirements also. And I would just hope that with that in mind, if the minimum requirement were to be lowered, that we could count on the library to be willing and ready to pitch in at that point also, in terms of making reductions if the minimum requirement were to lower. I understand that would probably require some loss of service, but it's something that we're all experiencing all across town government. So I would hope that we would have that commitment from the library staff to be able to pitch in it, if that were to come about.
I would say that I'm definitely in favor of making sure that the library remains certified. So it must meet the minimum amount to accomplish that. I'm pretty adamant about that. So I would concur that we need to find the cash to make that happen. And this is not, whatever was said here regarding what Mr. Younger, any cuts that he may have made is not a criticism of his cuts. He's trying very, very hard to, as I said before, it was a $772,000 deficit, and now a week later we're down to zero. This is a very fluid type situation. Things are being done to try and make everything balance, and I commend that. This particular cut I'm not in favor of. I would support that the library meet the minimum requirements to stay certified. So I would support an increase back to the $392,045.
I'd go over there.
Mr. Vina. Thank you,
I
Mr.
have a
Chairman.
collection of all from each.
There you go, right? A bucky.
That's it.
I do agree that we do have to meet the minimum, so we do not lose the certification of the library itself. It's very important. I guess one question I do have to ask is, can we meet that minimum without a children's librarian?
You can't meet the minimum if you cut that money. I mean, without having a children's librarian working in the building, is that what you mean? Or without having the position existing
Without having the
theoretically?
position existing?
And,
Yes.
yes, we can be certified without having the position exist.
That really gets to how they spend the
But-
minimum funding in the
What,
minimum system.
yeah.
If they deem it's most appropriate to have a part-time children's librarian and change the funding mix in some other way, then I would be, I don't want to get into that detail.
No,
wanna
I
get
mean-
them that- I want to get them the number so they get the certification, and I think the trustees can figure out how.
Exactly. I guess what I'm doing is trying to back up Mr. Younger with his statement of there will be no hirees. And I was wondering how they could work that if they could.
Can we just, I don't know if we want this in a form of a motion or how we want to do it, but I'd like to it seems like it's a pretty clear consensus.
I don't think we
just
need
wanna
a
make
motion.
sure that
I just want to make sure.
Mr. Younger just asked me to make sure, you know, I don't think we need a motion, because I think it's a pretty clear consensus that our goal here is to meet the library's current MAR. Should that change, we can open the discussion. Should there's an announcement of a change in the MAR, we'll reopen that discussion, but for tonight, we know what it is today, and the goal is as part of the budget, to meet that bottom line, that minimum bottom line.
Whatever that number is.
Right, today is 392,045. If it changes, we'll invite the trustees and the library director back, and we can reopen that discussion.
So you can work on that, Mr. Younger, with Mr. Dow
We'll make the adjustment tomorrow.
Mr. Jones Senior.
Just a quick comment. There are 3 criteria. One is hours, which we meet. One is the overall budget amount, which I think we've already discussed. But a third criteria, keep in mind, is a materials budget aspect that also has to be met. So there are 3 steps in the overall criteria. So when you do the matrix of the total, you should address the materials portion also.
My presumption was that mix would be appropriate to meet all the criteria.
They will, but on the line item.
On the line item within the budget.
You have to define it appropriately so it's publicly known.
Right, and, yeah, if I may, just to that, so we can make sure we all go out on the same page. Mrs. Minton and I discussed the materials budget, which needs to be 16% of the total budget. It had in your book been slightly higher. We've reduced it to, talked and reduced it to precisely 16%. And those other funds will be put back into the staff line in an effort to keep the library open, you know, appropriate hours, and staff not stretched too thin. So we'll be at that 16%. And I guess if Ms. Minton and Mr. Dow can talk to make sure that those line items are now accurate and up to date, so that they can be reflected, to Mr. Jones's point, accurately in the warrant.
I'll check it.
You'll check it for us. Okay. Good.
Good, thank you.
Who wants to go next?
You don't have any
Mine's pretty big.
Huh?
Mine's pretty big.
Oh, okay. Well, since you're volunteering. So, Larry, you're next.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Young.
just through Mrs. Bailey, the only difference right now between Mr. O'Leary's budget and mine, discussed with him earlier, was I reduced office supplies by 100, 500 to 400, and reduced travel to 0 because there's no travel expenditures. Other than that, we are in agreement. His postage has been high, not by his,
Yeah, not right.
not by his making, but by the number of applicants he's been having.
Right, yeah, I mean, basically, that's the thing I was saying, we have no problem with doing our part, and, you know, he said that we cut up 2 line items on it, which was fine. But basically, where we're at right now is that, you know, I said it earlier, we are over budget at this point for the rest of this year. We put in for a transfer of $2,000 to go back into our account, because what's happened is that, for example, last year there were 70 public hearings at the Board of Appeals. And at this time last year, there were 11. As of this time this year, there's 24, it's over doubled. And so what happened, it keeps increasing every year as far as the hearings. And the main problem is postage and advertising, where a lot of our expenses go, and also into supplies. So not this coming Thursday at our hearing, the following hearing, the board is going to discuss our fees as far as increasing the fees, okay? And at first glance, I spoke with Marcy about it, we're taking in, probably gonna be doubling our fees, which is, right now the fee's about $70, we may go to $140, but we're gonna fine tune it a little bit. Not to make it a money maker, but to at least cover a portion of the cost. Because, I mean, there's no way we could raise our fees to cover our whole budget, you know, as far as the salary and things. And also, another item that I spoke to Tom about, we've been getting more and more home occupations coming in over the past few years. You know, because of technologies and people having the ability to work from home, we've been getting a lot of these home occupations. And one thing that I was proposing to Tom, which he was checking on for me, and he's gonna get back to me when he hears. I was looking at possibly charging a fee, an annual fee for the home occupations. And the reason being that if, my thought is that if someone were to go out in the marketplace to rent an office, let's say on Route 28, it would cost them $500 to $1,000 a month. But yet, if they get to stay home and run their business, they already, it doesn't cost them anything. So just like you have the licensing fees for different types of businesses, I was looking into possibly charging maybe $100, $200 per home occupation that we grant, which would be an annual fee coming into the town. So we just generate that revenue every year.
Which when you look at the cost of renting the office space.
It's a really good deal for $200. You want to spend $200 to stay at home.
Well, and it's deductible.
Right, yeah, right. You want to stay, pay $200 to stay home, or you want to go out in the marketplace and spend $12,000. So I was thinking that a $200 fee is actually minimal for someone that's going to have an operation out of their home. But if we had probably about 20 home occupations last year that were applied for. And if there was a fee structure in place, there's $4,000 that would have come in just in the past year. And this isn't going away. This is coming more and more as time goes on. So I'm looking at seeing if we can possibly get it into effect. And as long as somebody has their business, they're going to pay the $200. So in no time, there could be 100 home occupations coming in over the next 4 or 5 years. And now you're looking at $20,000 a year coming in from home occupations. And but again, Tom's getting some legal opinions on it. And so between the fee increases and if we could possibly do something like this, it would bring in a lot more revenues to help support our department.
I just had a question for Mr. O'Leary. Would this be moving forward, or would you be able to go back?
I'd love to go back. I don't know if we could. I don't think you can. Okay, but I would assume, Tom, you can't go back. Is that correct?
I would make the assumption, particularly if you have given a home occupation permit under certain conditions, it'd be questionable whether you could go back and revote that and change and add a fee to that.
Right, I don't know that you could, but going forward, see, and why I want to have Tom get the opinion, because when we issue these home occupations, we have the right to put, restrictions and requirements on them. And if in fact, if we can't do it one way as far as with seeing if it, what the process might need to be, but if in fact we can take and put a requirement that there's a $200 fee annually, if someone is not happy with that, they have a right to appeal that decision. Which nobody's going to spend $10,000 on legal fees to worry about a $200 permit. I don't believe. Yeah, I know. Well, so I'm just.
Town or something?
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully, when Tom gets the answer, that we can find some way to implement it, and I really don't think it's overcharging an extra exorbitant fee to someone that's running an operation out of their house. I don't think that's unreasonable. And yes.
Mr. Kelly, you all set?
Yeah.
Mr. Kelly.
The idea of generating revenues obviously is something that we could use. I'm not sure, though, what services are we offering the homeowner?
We're offering them the ability to work out of their house. We don't have to say yes. The Board of Appeals does not have to say yes. They are not entitled to the home occupation. It is required by a special permit, which means they have to meet certain conditions. If the board feels, depending on our interpretation as to we feel the occupation that they're applying for falls within that criteria, we don't have to grant it.
Yeah, this is down the road, I guess,
Right.
either way, in terms of a legal opinion. Philosophically, I have a little bit of a problem charging someone who's already paying property taxes to provide services for that piece of property. Because they sit at home and are in front of a computer, I don't know, if it's some type of an inspection fee or a service, like the restaurants, we have health inspectors go in and have to provide a service and they pay a fee. Personally, I'd have a little bit of problem saying to someone, you know what, just because, you were able to come up with a business that you can run out of your home, we're entitled to more money. To me, there's something wrong with that. I don't know.
Well, we all, again, have our own opinions. I just look at it that if someone I mean, the residential neighborhoods were built and developed and zoned for that purpose, for residents. Now you wanna go a little bit beyond that, and you wanna take and run a business out of there. Okay, if it falls within what we feel is the criteria, and we say, okay, I look at it that someone's gonna be sitting at their computer at their home, they're not gonna be paying the overhead of a typical business person in this community, they're getting the benefit to stay home, and a $200 fee is not, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of business people on 28 would like to pay $200 a year to be in business, you know, and I'm just kind of looking at it that way, that if somebody's gonna generate an income, because we're gonna grant them the permit, then we should be entitled to a little bit of something to help. Anyway, doesn't mean it's gonna happen, it's just something that we're gonna be discussing and, you know, just trying to help generate the revenues, because, again, our budget, if I had to charge the fee to cover the salary in the, you know, of my secretary and everything else that goes along in my department, you know, I'd be charging $400 for somebody coming in for a variance. You know, you can't do that. You know, so I was kind of looking at, to justify helping to, you know, deal with our financial crisis, to take and, okay, where can we get a little extra revenue without hurting anyone? And I look at it as if somebody's generating an income out of their house, $200 really shouldn't make much of a difference. You know, but it makes a big difference in the overall picture over time.
No, you had a question.
Go ahead.
Mr., yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Vino.
I guess back to the point that Mr. Kelly brought up earlier in the evening, justifying that fee, are we gonna be able to do that?
This is something that we're looking into, Mr. Younger.
Let's not, yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
let's
Yeah, I think
let's
we
not
need
get
more-
hung up on this.
Yeah,
No,
I think we
yeah,
need more
I
think
information.
It's just something that we're looking into, that we have some interest in, and if it's legal, it's legal, if it's not, it's not.
Right. No, I'm not going either way.
Right.
That was a question, but that's the way.
Yeah, so, Mr. Young, as you can tell, there's some interest on the board when you get the answers to some of those questions. Obviously, you're looking at your current fees, not
Yeah.
fees, but revising the current fees, and that, you know, I don't think the board takes any issue with those.
Yeah, right now, the application is $70, and it just doesn't cover it.
Yeah. I had two quick questions, if I can. Although, Mrs. O'Leary, did you?
One quick stupid question for Mrs. O'Leary. Is it for a fee or for a permanent, for a license to operate a business?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out, where we can, to take and,
Because
the category. Right.
If it's an annual permit or an annual license to operate a home office, then that,
Right,
so that's part of what he needs to.
That's what we're trying to find out, where, if it can happen, where it would fall.
So
Great point.
why then, on a follow-up to that, why would you not be able the next year to charge that person you hadn't been charging the previous year, because it's an annual fee that's going to be now established to
You
get?
stole one of my questions.
So there you go.
No, that's a great point. I think that whole
You
issue.
may lose it this year and not get it, or whatever, when you institute.
Well,
it,
I'm not
but
sure
the
you can't go
following year
back.
it's
No,
gonna
I'm
go
not
up.
sure either, but we need to talk to council, because when we issue the special permit, it's subject to certain conditions. And now the question is whether or not, is this fee a condition, or is it a permit, or is
If
it a
you make it
license?
an annual permit, right.
Right, so, I mean, that's, it has to be dealt with by way of town council, but if that's the case, if you can go back, I mean, it's a substantial amount of revenue,
Yeah.
you know?
Thank you, Mrs. O'Leary.
It's easily seen we don't talk business at home.
No,
Yeah.
no short talk.
No, we don't talk.
If you did, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you're all.
Best is yet to come.
You mentioned the current deficit, and you're applying for a transfer from reserve fund,
Yes,
so that you're going through FinCom.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just,
Yeah, and again, it's because what happens is that we have
Well,
certain
you don't have to-
processes we have to follow legally as far as
postage
mailings, and
went up.
there's nothing we can do. you know?
Postage went up, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, so, you know, we try to stay within the guidelines and do what we have to do. But
The other question actually that comes to mind, I'm just thinking out loud, and maybe more for Mr. Dow, but if there's a home office, when the assessor's office goes through, do they count that personal property?
Off the top of my head, answer is yes.
But that may be an issue to
Well,
follow up on.
And it would be classified, my guess, as mixed use.
well, my question is, I guess, George, is that, I don't know that there is in fact a tie-in between findings from the Board of Appeals giving home occupations and your department, is there? Do you know of?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I've never heard.
That would be picked up when they went out to review the property, though.
But when the assessors do a property review on commercial property,
You can walk into a lot, yeah, I know, but you can walk into a lot of homes, you know, your house, my house, anybody's house, and they're gonna have a desk with a computer set up. Who knows what, I mean, it's a personal computer. What I'm saying is that there's a tie-in between the findings that were issued,
that's why I'm
the
asking.
business certificate at the town clerk's office, that should trigger
Right, that's why
notice
I'm
to
asking
them,
the question.
so that they can automatically charge their $75, $100, whatever the number might be for the office equipment.
Right. So obviously, the assessors go into every home in town and
Right.
find a home office of some sort. But
Well,
the question is, was there a permit issued?
well,
for
you,
that
well,
home
you beat me
office?
to that, because I was gonna bring up the whole thing about the, you know, if somebody has a home occupation, and it's a part of the public record, then just as businesses on Route 28 are taxed for their personal property relative to the business, so should the home occupation.
That's what-
And in fairness to the assessors, I can't, you know, they walk into the houses, I'm sure they don't know where all the home occupations are. You know, and not to their fault. I just think that the way the system is set up in town hall, that there's probably not set up in a way that something would trigger it. But could probably pretty easily be done.
Yeah,
You know?
I saw Mr. Dow write a note, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
assume he wrote a note to check in on that.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, and that perhaps would enter into the discussion about the fee. Because if.
Business is
if-
business, doesn't make
yeah.
any difference where it is,
Yeah.
okay?
So, and that personal property tax is applicable to those home occupations.
Absolutely. So hopefully, you know, if this is the direction that, you know, the world is going into, then we need to try to adjust to it. We just need to find the right avenue to do it.
Thank you. Other, Mrs. Bailey?
Yes, just getting back to the budget, I do have to say that one area of concern to me may be the training and education budget, which was cut from $400 to $50. Just because, for example, on Thursday night, we have the Central Place hearing on a 40B, and some of, I think, the projects that come before the ZBA in the next year may get more complex, may have more to do with 40B, and I would
Oh,
like,
yes.
I would like the board to have the budget to avail themselves of education surrounding that, and I know we said we cut the
Right, well, this,
travel budget, I'm sorry, Tom?
We just cut travel, we cut training.
Oh, well, I had a note from,
we had looked, told me,
I had a note of a revised budget from.
yeah, we had some revisions, Tom, when it came back to us, that Jim had looked at, this
Yeah.
column over here, written in the, you had looked at about changes from these numbers.
I know it's from,
And we're trying to come back with some revised numbers, Tom. Yeah, and then I guess it was determined that there was no way we were gonna be able to meet these because we're already out of budget. So if you know, if it got to a point when I talked to you, Marcy, about these were the other numbers that were gonna be turned in.
yeah,
And then, after looking at it, I'm going, wait a minute, I didn't realize that our budget was gone. I'm going, wait a minute, well, how am I gonna cut this if we're already out of money now, when there's
Sure.
4 months left?
okay.
So, it never got to Tom's desk as far as.
Okay, I didn't know
as
that,
far as
sorry.
Right, Tom?
Come to my desk.
Tom, yeah, got as far as your desk, but then we realized that it wasn't doable.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure that
okay.
we did have an appropriate education.
Yeah,
So that, the funding, I agree with Mrs. Bailey, so the funding's in there for the education. Okay.
yeah, because she's right, that we're gonna need it, because we know it's all coming, you know, so. But in the past, we really don't use it that often.
Yeah, but things
Things
look
are
like
changing.
they're changing.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have anything else in the ZBA budget unless Mr. O'Leary does, or Mr. DeCola, or a member of the board.
I think I'm all set. We're gonna try to do our part, again, like I said, within a couple of weeks. Now, I guess my question is the process, if in fact we are gonna increase our fees, it's just to what point? Tom, does that have to come back to anybody to, if we increase our fees, can we just do it on our own, and does that have to be approved by someone?
I don't know, because I've never dealt with a ZBA increasing their fees, we can look into that.
Okay, I'll talk to you during the week, and,
I know in the case of Mr. DeCola, it went before the board this evening,
right.
because historically it's gone before the board. We'll look into see what historically, how ZBA is handled.
Yeah, whatever they've done historically, and then whatever's required by law.
Well, it's gonna be really historic, because I don't know the last time they raised the fees.
Well, and I would think that in some way, whether it's a requirement or not, I would ask that before they get finalized by the Board of Appeals, that regardless of what the absolute legal process is,
Mhm.
that you confer with us.
Sure.
We need to find out what the legal process is.
Right.
But I would ask that if it says the ZBA can set the fee and that's that, I would ask that you just let the board know.
Yes,
So that we can, we'd just like to have a
Well, what
discussion.
I'm gonna do is we're gonna, like I said, not this next hearing, the hearing after, we'll be discussing it.
Okay.
And I'm gonna try to get a consensus or a vote from the board at that time, if we can come up with an agreement as to what we think we should be, which I'm sure we can.
Okay.
And then I can present it to Marcy, and I don't think you want me to come back, or I can just present it to Marcy, and she can present it to you.
Well, that's fine too, just so we know.
Okay.
And before you take a final vote on them, we'd like, if there's any.
Well, yeah,
feedback.
well, if we take a vote, it'll be that we're unanimous in, this is what we believe that it should be.
Okay.
Okay? So, but I'll find out what the legal process is first.
Good.
Anyway.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Great.
Moving right along, why don't we go to CPC, Planning Commission?
We want to take a recess? I know you're on a roll, but let's take a recess.
Okay.
Take a 5-minute recess.
Just a couple brief highlights from me, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Rogers. At my request, Mr. Rogers did do a fee survey and found the fees for North Reading CPC to be in line with other communities, so I think we're all set there. And I'll just, two things, if you turn to the detail page of your budget, page 2 on the yellow sheets, I wanted to point out that the reduction in the clerical work, clerical line item, line 51-130, will mean that there's no meeting coverage for the CPC, right?
Correct, that eliminates overtime completely.
Eliminates clerical overtime in the CPC budget, and so no meeting secretary. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out, and Bob and George, maybe you can help me here, I didn't get to call anyone about it. Under purchase of services, fourth line down, 53040, I think it's a typo, it says 200, but I'm pretty sure it should say 2,000 based on previous years and based on my discussion with Mr. Rogers. It says 200.
Well, that's what I asked for, but I think Tom reduced it.
Was it reduced to 200?
Right, generally, right now, the overall engineering cost is slowly down, and right now, they haven't expended, when this was done, expended approximately about less than $200 for fiscal year '03.
Okay, well, I apologize for not talking about this privately in my liaison assignment, because I wasn't aware of that, and I assumed it actually would be a typo based on my discussion with Mr. Rogers, and he made a case for me in describing what that line item entails, that, and you can imagine that what $200 would do for professional engineering firms.
That'll be about 3 phone calls.
Yeah, exactly.
That many?
So since I was not aware of that reduction, I guess I would ask Mr. Rogers to speak to the practicality of that, and then anything else he'd like in this budget. Otherwise, I went through everything else and felt comfortable. And if anything else has changed, as of today, if you can highlight that, because I don't have that either.
Mr. Young.
First of all, changes, advertising 500 to 200, professional services from 23 to 2000, and other office supplies from 2,500 to 1,900.
Like I said, that 53040 concerns me, so I guess I've asked Mr. Rogers if he could address that. And I apologize for not asking before. I thought it was a typo.
Yeah, we do have the need for engineering services, and generally that comes up in the spring, so we haven't spent the money, obviously, but if I had my druthers, I would swap those two numbers between other and engineering for the professional services, because we spend more on professional services engineering than we do on other types of services. I can live with the numbers if I can tweak them a little bit in the columns. But to only have $200 in our engineering line, that's useless to us. You might as well have zero, because we can't use an engineer for $200.
Then overall, based on Mr. Younger's proposed numbers, you'd just like to be able to, you'd just like to move them around with them?
Yeah, I mean, Tom made a pretty good point. We need to hold the level line and hit the number. And I can deal with my bottom line if I can move some of these numbers around within my lines.
Okay. That's fine.
Support that flexibility?
Well, why don't you
I'll do that.
submit a readjusted set of lines to Mr. Younger?
That's fine. I would mention the fees that Marcy mentioned a minute ago. We haven't increased our fees in 14 years either. And still, when we did our research, we're right about mid-range of all the towns that we looked at. We looked at about a dozen towns. And I was telling other people, I'll triple my fees if you want me to. You know, they got to come to us, they got to do what they do. If I tripled my fees, I still wouldn't cover my department's budget from what I get. But we'd be a very expensive town to work in.
But I think the goal is not to just triple fees. The goal is to review them and try to be, you know, in the middle.
Obviously, if we
Between
haven't
the middle
reduced
and the
them-
top tier.
If we haven't increased them in 14 years, we were on the high side for probably 7 or 8 of those years.
Right.
Now we're in the middle.
Other questions from the board? Oh, great, thank you.
You feel better?
Just, Mr. Younger know what those line items are. Okay, Mrs. Bailey.
Are you pointing to Jim? This is the hardest part, because it goes there. Okay, elder service, all right. Why don't you do elder services, then health, and we'll save the longer one for last, but since that seems to be okay. Only just a very.
Why, because I'm an old lady?
So we all have elder services handy, second tab, orange. There's not too many changes here, not too much to highlight. If you remember last year, we had reduced the assistant director of elder affairs, and then at October town meeting, we're able to add back a clerk who's with us tonight. This is Mark Neal. Am I saying your last name correctly?
That's correct.
And Mark is Edie's clerk and has been great service since in his brief time at Elder Services, and that's reflected. That salary is reflected in line 51, 130 clerical. Aside from that, I'll let Mrs. O'Leary address anything else. Obviously, there are many services given to seniors, not the least of which, some data I'd never seen before, 6 months worth of van rides, which are almost 2,000 van rides services for seniors.
Definitely, in a month. Thank you very much. And I certainly want to thank Mrs. Bailey for certainly being the liaison and coming and spending time and knowing exactly what happened at the center, because she was there during the time when the phone was ringing and many interruptions certainly came about, and familiarized herself with some of the services there. And I also want to thank Tom Younger for certainly putting the effort that he put into in making the changes for not only my department, but being a department head and having been at the meeting and had the explanation that was given to all of us, and knowing what was explained and what to look for down the road. It certainly answers some of the questions that were asked tonight, whether the department heads were briefed on it and were familiar with the changes that were anticipated, and each one of us knows how the constraints have been put on each and every department, and yet we realize that we want to retain what we have, but we're willing to certainly work with the administrator as well as the town officials in order to retain the quality of services that we have been giving in the past and hope to continue to do in the future. My budget is certainly bare bones, there's no question about it as far as services is concerned and giving the quality of services. I do not have anybody on a waiting list at this time, whether it's for Meals on Wheels or whether it's for any other services, home care or otherwise. And I think that's, reflected very well for us as a community in servicing our elders, and also our transportation, which is increasing all the time. I do realize that gas has gone up, and some communities do charge fees for van services, but at this point in time, hopefully we will probably not have to make that fee charge along with everybody else's fee charges that are being made. But if it has to be made, we certainly will try to do anything that is required of us. So I certainly thank you for, all of you, for each and every one of you, for your services that you have given to us, and we hope to continue with the services and the quality of services that are being given to our elders. Thank you. If there's any questions or any part of the budget that any member wishes to ask about, I'll be very happy to answer.
I just have two quick questions. I know the clerical position was partially funded by a grant, and I assume that it's fully funded next year. That the grant.
You are assuming what's most unrealistic, Mr. Chairman. I just cannot conceive that it would be fully funded, by a grant next year.
No, I wasn't saying that.
Oh.
I'm sorry. For this fiscal year, it's partially funded by a grant.
Right.
But for next year, we're
Paying.
paying for it. We're assuming
That's it.
that the grant
Mhm.
won't be there again.
Mhm.
Right? That's all.
Okay.
I wasn't advocating that it be fully funded by a grant.
No,
I don't
no,
think
mean,
the
that's
state's
why-
gonna have a
that's
lot
why-
of grants going out the door this year.
That's why it's reflected in the budget as
Right,
such.
okay. So we're presuming that the grant will have gone away. Okay, that's fine. And then, on the other charges and expenses, I'm just looking at, the FY02 actual, and then I'm looking at the proposed budget for FY04, and I don't know if Mr. Younger or Mrs. Bailey or Mrs. O'Leary.
Okay, Mrs. O'Leary.
Hold
Oh,
on.
I can, but I'll let Mrs. O'Leary, go ahead. We talked about it.
I mean, it's fine, I don't have a problem with it, it's a
It's going like
reduction,
that,
so,
well,
but I want to make sure it's not,
It's not a mistake.
it's not a mistake, because it's a large reduction.
Definitely not a mistake.
Okay. I knew if it was yours, it wasn't a mistake.
You better believe it. Definitely not a mistake. What you see is what you get. And that's what it is. Looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Okay?
Yeah,
I
if all
was gonna ask
departments,
why.
if all departments could do that, that would be wonderful.
Is
Well-
it feasible? I mean, is this something that,
I know.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Is that number, I mean, go from 11,082 in '02 to 2,800 in '04, is that feasible? I mean,
Positively,
it is,
positively.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll get a sponsor.
Okay? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? No? Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck, Martin. Don't forget to put my visiting nurse in. She did?
This is,
She did.
thank you, Mrs. O'Leary.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes, help. Help, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's
In
on
red.
the red
In
section.
the red.
Oh, I'm losing my mind.
In the red.
Okay, that's right.
Right, you're at the code
Okay, I
enforcement.
apologize. I have all these papers in, so I can't see my tabs.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, Mr. Fair and I met several weeks ago, and I'll turn it over to him briefly. We had seen data that the health department had increased their fees to meet a market rate, so I think that that part of the budget has been addressed. And then, like I said, I'll let Mr. Fair discuss it. Some of the cuts, though, specifically have been in the mosquito control program, which is under the environmental page. And, you know, the health department, for professional services, provides VNA to follow up on communicable diseases and food you know, there's also food inspection. But like I said, it seemed like the cuts were largely from the mosquito control program, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Fair.
And we had $9,300 of additional cuts today.
Okay, I'm not aware of those.
We can still stay in business next year, but I think I may have to rearrange some of the line items in the mosquito control budget. May have to be further reduced to make things work.
Can we know
Sure.
where those cuts are?
Sure. First, if you go on the administrative end, clerical, we reduced the overtime, so we'll go from 42,041 to 40,119. In the purchase of services, professional services will drop to 1,600, but advertising actually goes up to 600. So their total number should be 3,250. Other supplies, the 54,000 line should go from 400 to 300. And everything else there stays the same. And on the environmental side, the professional services went from 15,000 to 9,500. And that was based on the current expenditure rate for professional services other within the department. And 50 under community health, the 52,000 line purchase of services went from 7,400 to 6,500 based on current expenditure rate.
Is that all?
That's it. And that total, the 9,300.
Right.
If I may, I guess just follow up on some of those, and of course I support Mr. Fair moving the budget around as he deems necessary. I just wanted to point out what a couple of those lines are, and feel free to interrupt, Martin, if you want to add things in. The 53,000 line in purchase of service, professional services, other on administration. That's, and correct me if I'm wrong, I have in my notes that that's a grant to, a mental health grant to Riverside Outpatient Center at Wakefield, which provides, am I on the right line?
The purchase of
Professional services other?
under the administration
Yeah.
section of the budget is actually for when it gets busy, you need extra help for, say, soil
Oh,
testing
I must
or
have maybe I've done the wrong page.
inspections,
Okay.
or also for vacation coverage. When I'm on vacation, we cover inspections. I think that was a reduction of $900.
Okay. Where where is that Riverside grant?
Well, we took that out of the budget last year, along with the support of grant to the Association for Retired Citizens. So it would be nice to see some support back in the budget for the East Middlesex mental health outpatient, because the services are used by citizens in the town, but I guess it doesn't look like that is a viable option at this point.
Mr. Faraheen shared with me a letter from the Riverside